that there was one device that I spoke about before I joined Medtronic, and that device startup company ended up showing my TikTok to our CEO at Medtronic, Jeff Martha, as part of a presentation to help to kind of seek an investment from Medtronic. That was actually one of the first times I think Jeff actually came across me was in that presentation, watching my TikTok, even before meeting me in person. So I think it's pretty telling what the power of social media can be, even, you know, in a corporate setting.
Austin Chang, welcome to the Scope Forward show. You're the Chief Medical Officer for Medtronic Endoscopy. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Austin, you're also an interventional endoscopist and you're balancing many, many things. You're a big social media influencer and it's made a big difference to many, many lives. So I want to learn and talk all about it. So let's go back all the way. Why did you decide to become a doctor?
I think that there are several reasons. There are several physicians in my family. My grandfather was a surgeon in the World War II era. I have several cousins who are also physicians, none of whom are gastroenterologists. But that was sort of my environment and upbringing. My father is an engineer. He actually worked for a medical device company previously at one point at Baxter. And so I feel like in the back of my mind, there was this environment that I grew up in. And on top of that, I feel like my parents exposed me to a lot of great experiences growing up, like volunteering, sometimes in medical settings as well. And ultimately, when I was in college, I tried to keep an open mind with a lot of different classes, even a lot that were not relevant to my major, which was biology, but also like political science and economics and whatnot. And I tried to just really be honest with myself about what would be a good fit for my personality. And ultimately, I felt that medicine was the right path. So that was really my entry into the whole space.
And how did you pick GI?
I also, again, kept a very open mind going into medical school and went through all the rotations thinking that I originally was going to be a surgeon. So I was definitely interested in something procedural. But along the way, I thought that I might be interested in plastic surgery and orthopedic surgery, neurology at one point. And it was really the internal medicine residence that inspired me to go into internal medicine. And originally, I thought I was going to pursue pulmonary critical care. And then once I entered residency, changed my mind, thought I was going to do interventional cardiology, and really at the last minute decided to switch to gastroenterology. And part of that was because of my friends, honestly, who were all applying to gastroenterology. And I thought, why are all my friends going to GI? And, that told me one thing, that I really would mesh well with the personality in gastroenterology. But on top of that, I discovered that there's a large variety of organs that the field, offers, a lot of technology and innovation, taking things that were more invasive surgically to something less invasive, which is kind of a lot of what procedural GI is based upon. And yeah, that technology aspect I think has really guided me towards really where I've ended up today.
How long has it been since that point to today? How many years has it been?
The decision making part was probably around 2012, but my GI fellowship was 2014 to 2017. And that was at Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard Medical School. So that's when I was exposed to bariatric endoscopy. It's such a powerhouse for interventional endoscopy that it guided me in that direction. During my GI fellowship, I also obtained a master's in public health, did my bariatric endoscopy fellowship with Dr. Chris Thompson, and then pursued an interventional year from 2017 until 2018 at Thomas Jefferson in Philadelphia. So I finished all of my training in 2018.
Yeah, so that's about 5 years ago since you finished.
Not that long.
Not that long. And I'm sure, people wonder, how does one accelerate one's career the way that you did from that point to being in the role that you are, with Medtronic, for example? And a lot of, I'm sure, GIs, whether in academic medicine or in private practice medicine, have this question. And I'm sure many of them don't ask you, but they must be wondering about it. So I'd love to know what your view is.
I can't take credit for all of it myself. I have to credit a lot of the people I came across, the mentors who I leaned on throughout the years, particularly Dr. Chris Thompson, was very instrumental in giving me the exposure to, technology and innovation and opportunities that were available outside of kind of the traditional academic path. But also some of the exposures that I had, even during fellowship, I did a kind of like a part-time side gig at a startup that was not interventional related, but still within the GI space. And, when I stayed at Jefferson for my faculty position, I had the great fortune of meeting the CEO of Jefferson Health at the time, Dr. Steve Plasko, who's a big name within the digital health world, kind of health tech space. And he's been a huge supporter and advocate for me. So I owe him a lot as well. And, bits and pieces along the way of people just encouraging me and guiding me in the right direction and supporting kind of my goals. And, even exposure that I've gotten being on social media for the past decade, even to folks outside of GI, outside of my own specialty who have inspired me in a lot of different ways and shown me that there's other avenues out there. So I'm not the only one who can take credit for where I am today. And even that, I'm still learning and growing. And I don't necessarily see myself as having accelerated my career. I feel like I've just taken a bit of a different path and I'm still finding my way and learning a lot. But it's true that I've learned a whole different kind of side of healthcare and gained a different perspective. And I'm very fortunate and grateful for that.
Thank you for being humble, Austin. But I want you to brag a little bit, if you don't mind. And this is about social media, right? Like, so I want to talk about that and I want to get to the depth of it from your side. When you got onto the platforms, you never intended it to be, an influencing platform or whatever. Like you were trying things out, you're playing, you found it interesting, and you might have gotten started that way. But I want to know what that path looked like in a very different way. You've innovated in that space as well. Having dabbled in a few platforms, I know what it takes and I know the flack that one can face. It's a great balancing act. I'm curious to know how you do it and how did that story turn out?
On the surface, it looks like it doesn't take much effort. And maybe some platforms, especially if you're focused on one thing, it is, not much effort. But when you think about all the different platforms out there and creating content across the board, it can be a lot. But this journey really goes a while back. So I've always been a lover of social media. I've even used social media before Facebook times, like when MySpace and other blogging sites were in vogue. And Facebook came out my freshman year in college. So I was kind of the target demographic then. And, over the years, I've really seen how outside of healthcare, social media can really drive awareness and they're really captivate audiences. And I believed in its reach. And ultimately, when I was in residency a little over a decade ago, I spent some time at ABC News trying to learn how people receive medical information through conventional media because I was noticing how some of my patients were coming to the hospital after things that they've heard on TV. And so I was curious to know what that process was like. So I spent some time behind the scenes at ABC News as part of the medical unit. And in that time, they were hosting weekly Twitter chats about various health topics. And that's when I thought to myself, we could use more trained health professionals speaking out on these platforms, speaking about, what we're trained to talk about, rather than leaving it to people who aren't trained and having a lot of misinformation. So it's kind of like the early days of my understanding of misinformation. And from there, I started out on Twitter. I started noticing that some patients were paying attention. And this is just me talking about what I was learning and training or what my experience was at various conferences. And, Twitter is kind of, the bar is pretty low for entry and, it's all kind of text-based, especially back then. And then slowly I felt more comfortable as I completed training to get on Instagram, put my face out there, start, talking about health on that platform early on. And similarly, I've always just been an early adopter to all the various platforms. So on TikTok in 2019, I was probably one of very, very few doctors on TikTok at the time. And I actually went back and told all of my Instagram friends who, most of whom were not in gastroenterology, actually probably all of them were not in gastroenterology. And from there, the pandemic really then accelerated the conversation further because everyone was on their phones, everyone was on social media, spending a lot of time. And it really highlighted the importance of how social media can impact public opinion of healthcare, public perception of health professionals. And our number one topic on the news for a long time was the pandemic. So it gave a lot of us doctors a lot of visibility. But I will say that, back in 2019, I founded a nonprofit professional society called the Association for Healthcare Social Media to help educate other health professionals on how to use social media. And we partnered with various platforms like YouTube, LinkedIn, Pinterest to educate on how not only to use the platforms, but how to create content. So how to pay attention to lighting and audio and things that impact, the quality of the production. We also partnered with Cochrane Collaborations to give out mini kind of healthcare social media research grants. So we really treated it like an academic endeavor. And throughout the years, I was encouraged by some of my mentors to treat this whole social media presence like an academic pursuit. So I actually did a lot of social media related research, published on that in various GI journals and at conferences. And so I think what a lot of people don't realize is that this is not just me posting on social media. It was kind of a bigger kind of undercurrent that where I've learned a lot, gained a lot of traction in many different ways. And to this day, I think I've taken that experience, applied it to, my academic position where at that institution, I was once chief medical social media officer, helping shape the social media policy and helping out with strategy, and to my role now as chief medical officer and seeing how we can be more kind of patient facing and still even helping YouTube out with their kind of misinformation efforts in collaboration with some other organizations like the American Board of Internal Medicine. So it goes far beyond, I think, what people often see in the world of GI. And it's given me a lot of great opportunities. The latest of which I'd say was being involved in the healthcare leaders social media roundtable for the White House, which was a big deal.
That's awesome. If you must measure the impact, how would you do it? I really want to know. And I think people should know what's been the impact of this on your terms, and if there are any numbers or whatever. Like, I'd love to know what you see as impact.
Yeah, it's difficult to directly measure impact per se, right? And I think you're getting at that. But I think my goal was really to always reach patients and the general public more so than my physician colleagues. I think there's still a lot of value to networking and to educating one another. But for me, it was really empowering patients. And I would say, some of these platforms have lent themselves better than others to that and kind of allowed me to reach even more people. But in terms of tangible metrics, I would say, my combined, I would say, follower subscriber count across the platforms is over 650,000 views on certain platforms like TikTok alone. I know is over 180 million views for my videos, and some of which I can pinpoint. There's some videos that I put out there that had multiple millions of views that have actually been very beneficial. So for instance, there have been some videos about bariatric endoscopy where the comments kind of helped generate leads to refer patients to various practices around the country. So there was one video where I probably referred one patient at least to all major academic centers where they were doing bariatric endoscopic procedures. Another good example is that there was one device that I spoke about before I joined Medtronic, and that device startup company ended up showing my TikTok to our CEO at Medtronic, Jeff Martha, as part of a presentation to help to kind of seek an investment from Medtronic. So that's kind of a fun story. That was actually one of the first times I think Jeff actually came across me was in that presentation, watching my TikTok, even before meeting me in person. So I think it's pretty telling what the power of social media can be, even, in a corporate setting.
Amazing. Share more about the White House meeting.
Yeah, that came about as a part of the Office of Public Engagement. And what's interesting is this was in 2022, where I was invited to be a part of this group. And what the White House was realizing was a lot of the great policies that they were putting out weren't reaching the general public. The general public didn't know there were these great policies that were benefiting them, that were actually being passed. And so they were kind of leaning on some of us who were very active on social media to get the word out. And it was kind of the first time that they were recognizing that, oh, we can actually use kind of the influencer space within healthcare to get the message out about some of the policies they were having because they clearly were having a little trouble themselves.
Very interesting. So, Austin, what did you learn, from all this? What have you taken away?
I think the biggest lesson outside of just kind of the intricacies of social media and how it works and how to create content is just sticking to an idea that I truly believed in and going with it and finding, you know, champions to kind of push me along. I think that was probably the big overarching lesson. It was really one of those few moments where I really believed in it. I really felt like this is a tool that should be used in healthcare. There's no reason why it's impacting every other sector outside of healthcare. And even today, 2023, I feel like we've yet to see it harnessed completely for the benefit of raising awareness and education. We're still, it's a work in progress. I would say the second most important lesson is also storytelling and the importance of communication. And this is not something that came naturally to me. This is something that was honed through practice and creating short form content was how do I distill a very complex concept into something that can be summarized in 15 seconds that people can take away from and package it in a way that's fun and entertaining, not boring, and kind of in some ways subliminally influencing people to understand more about medicine and healthcare. So, and that I think has translated well just in general communication, and how I communicate with my colleagues and get the message across. I think that's not something that physicians were taught very well in medical school, and something that we should be taught more because the whole point is to communicate what we learn to our patients, right? And to our communities. But a lot of medical education is focused on the science and the medicine, which is very important. But there's so much else contextually that we need to be learning about, whether it's communication, whether it's about the business of healthcare, about health policy that we're simply not taught enough about. And I'm hoping to change that.
And technology too. I see that all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, the process of innovation for sure.
Absolutely. So coming to your system, how often do you put things out there? Like, so do you have a discipline? How does that work?
Well, I think now that I wear very many hats and it's hard to, keep all the balls I'm juggling in the air, I have taken a little bit more of a relaxed approach to social media since my focus is either on my clinical practice or on the medtech role. But yeah, in the past it was much more regimented, more consistent. I still think I'm pretty consistent on most platforms, just trying to put out content when I can and not letting anything lag for too long. And it is a careful balance between not completely becoming irrelevant and also not oversaturating, overexposing myself. But I think I've become so used to this process and I like sharing what I'm doing. A large part of my social media presence is injecting the human element into this and what my daily life is like and what my frustrations are and I'm open to sharing those things. So it does take a little bit of comfort in, putting myself out there and sometimes being vulnerable online. It's not super calculated. I don't have a team behind me. I do all this on my own. So even for those people who wondered how I did like YouTube in the past, I used to film on Saturdays. I used to edit on Sundays, create the thumbnail, do everything on my own.
Wow.
And for what I maintain now, it's still everything on my own. So there's no one helping me with it.
Congratulations on all this success, and I wish you more. I want to play a critique, and it's a question that I've always had about social media influencers, and particularly, let's say, in healthcare or in industries or spaces which are deemed serious. I've seen you put a picture of yourself out there and generate a lot of engagement and a lot of interest. And sometimes when I see that, I have two parts of me. So one part of me is very, very impressed and thinking, wow, look at this. The other part of me is thinking, but what's the point of this? It's just a picture. And what's it conveying? And what is the story? Or what action is somebody going to take after reading this or after seeing this? There are these two parts. I want to reconcile, I want to understand what goes on in your mind and how does all this work?
Honestly, I just like pictures.
Okay.
And I like putting, a visual aid to anything that I'm doing. I feel like we all learn better when there's a visual aid, we can relate to something better. Sure, I can just put text out there if I want, but I like showing pretty pictures. And I think the rest of the world does too. And that speaks to the longevity of platforms like Instagram,
Mm.
the popularity of platforms like TikTok, and why every other social media platform wants to emulate it. Every platform now has their own version. Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts. Is because people also gravitate to video content, short form video content. And yeah, so what's better than a still image? Video content, so where people are actually speaking to you, you can hear their voice. Social media is really just an extension of our daily lives and how we communicate with one another in person. We don't communicate with each other through numbers and letters. We communicate with each other through our voice, through imagery. And so that's what makes for a compelling story. I think you're right. Like some people don't have the correct motivation. And I think when people are inauthentic, it shows. And that's the reason why I only speak up really when I feel like I have something different and compelling to say, or something that's very personal. I don't just post to post. I think that that's a mistake that I maybe once made, is that if I just did something like that, it would come across as authentic. And I think I've been fortunate to have come to a point, even mentally, where I don't feel like I need to do that. That if people want to follow along, then great. If people don't want to follow along, that's okay. And so I don't try too hard, because I feel like if I do, it'll backfire on myself and make myself more stressed. And that's not the point of social media. The point of social media is not for me to stress out about gaining followers or views, or what the next piece of content should be. And for some people, they legitimately have that concern because it's tied to their income. They monetize their social media presence. I don't do that. So for me, it's just whenever whatever feels right, whenever I feel like there is a benefit to the message I'm putting out there, and whether that's my own personal experience, whether it's something, a technology that I'm, associated with. And I think that that's why I try to pair the image with whatever message I have putting out there.
I love your response. One final question on this topic, and we'll switch gears. I've met you in person. You come through as a quiet, serious, even reticent personality. And how does such a personality transform on the platforms?
Honestly, I think that I am a bit of an introvert at baseline. And, I kind of am very professional in the workplace. I think anyone who works with me at the hospital knows that. I am like what you described, quiet, serious. It's funny because there's some patients who find me off TikTok, very few, who actually come to see me and expect a totally different person. And yeah, I think that, part of social media presence is because I recognize that people want to be entertained, and if I am comfortable with being funny, and I like the social media trends, I can turn on a different type of online persona. And yeah, it was uncomfortable at first. This was not something that I always felt comfortable doing. And in fact, when I first started on like TikTok, I didn't expect anyone to see it. And at least, no, I didn't expect anyone I knew to see it. And before long, a lot of people had seen it. So then I felt, well, I guess cat's out of the bag, so I'm just gonna go with it. And I will say that I think because my focus has always been on creating a strong clinical foundation throughout my training, right? I've always aimed to train at the best places with the mentors who were well respected. And I wanted that for myself too. I wanted to be respected by my peers and to be taken seriously. And so when it came time to do the entertaining stuff and the fun things, people could still take me seriously within our circles and not doubt that I didn't know what I was talking about. I think that that's what's difficult, is like to still have the fun side. Everyone has a fun side. Even the most serious people within gastroenterology, they might not publicly show it, but in their personal lives, they have a fun side. I'm just probably more out there and now more comfortable with presenting it to the outside world. But yeah, I think that, it's that balance that I think I'm trying to strike, whether it's within the GI community, within the medtech community. That's, I think, depending on the audience I'm speaking to, I'm not speaking the same way on TikTok as I am on LinkedIn, where, the vast majority of my audience is kind of corporate professionals.
Let's switch gears. I want to talk more about your role at Medtronic and what you've
Mhm.
taken away in that role. And I want to talk more about AI and where technology is going in gastroenterology, what you do on a day-to-day basis.
That's a challenging question to answer because every day is very different for me. And I've been given the great fortune working with Gio DiNapoli, the president of Medtronic Endoscopy, because when I joined, he basically gave me a blank slate. And he said, figure out where you're valuable in this organization. And I set out really spending a lot of time in the field, understanding what kind of the pain points are of our business and came away with some areas that I thought I could help improve upon. And from there, I basically was, assigned several teams to lead. And so now I oversee several functions, including learning and development for our training sales force, medical education programming that we put on to help educate our health professionals on how to use our technologies, our opinion leader program, which is also our key opinion leader relationships, our society relationships, and kind of strategy behind that, and most recently medical affairs as well. And as an individual contributor, I am involved in pretty much all of the business development conversations that we have with any startup company or any company that we're looking to partner with. So that's been a lot of fun as well. And, day to day, on top of that, I'm also kind of trying to bridge the gap between my different roles and kind of speaking out on med tech related topics or other speaking engagements around my clinical practice or bariatric endoscopy and social media as well. So there's a lot of things that I'm kind of involved in every day, which takes me all around the country. As many people know, I travel quite a bit, which is all by my own choice. It's not necessarily a requirement, but I like doing it. And I think it's important for me to go out there and talk about what we're working on.
Bring us up to speed with what's happening with Medtronic. I was there at the GI Genius Summit earlier this year. It was a lot of fun, very, very innovative. You were putting out there, creating the platform to invite other companies or startups or even individuals to build on top of GI Genius. I thought that was brilliant. I'd love to know where the story is currently as far as GI Genius particularly, but all aspects of GI in Medtronic.
Yeah, I think that, we're at the forefront of AI and GI. And, what we're seeing right now with our fault detection device, GI Genius, is really just the beginning of this whole journey. And I think where we're positioning ourselves is, there's this hardware that we have that can host a variety of different algorithms, and we hope to create a platform to host algorithms that may apply to a variety of different aspects across gastroenterology and across a variety of different devices. And we know that we can't do it all, which is why we partnered with NVIDIA, why we are inviting external developers to also, develop algorithms that can potentially one day be hosted on the platform. So it's a very exciting time, and I think we'll see, new developments coming down the pipeline very soon with that. And I think that's also what gives us a bit of an advantage, over, we're not just restricted necessarily to what can be seen visibly through an endoscope, but other devices as well. And, we have the portfolio that potentially that can be applied to. I'm very excited about this space. And I think Medtronic is also seeing, Medtronic as a whole is looking at ways where AI can impact other parts of the business outside of GI. As you know, Medtronic covers a large range of different specialties and procedures. And again, we're all kind of learning together here, including our regulatory bodies, right? The FDA. So I think all this hype around AI just goes to show that there's going to be, a lot of progress, I think, in the coming years for this whole space. And I'm very excited.
Within the company, Austin, is there a cohesiveness in terms of the technology, let's say particularly AI, the algorithms that the company develops or uses? Is there a cohesiveness from one specialty to another specialty? Is there a combined strategy that is driving not just GI, but even other specialties that Medtronic plays in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's something that's still in development. There is actually kind of an AI compass that the whole company follows just to ensure that we're doing things ethically and that we're paying attention to various aspects of AI development, to make sure that it's done the right way. Because I know that there's a lot of concerns in some ways about how AI is developed. And so, I think the company is being very mindful of that and making sure that, for instance, it's equitably developed and that, what is being made is applicable to all populations out there.
I've had this conversation with Geo before, and I want to put a similar question back to you. I'm curious to see, how you might respond. So AI by itself is multiplying very, very rapidly, not just in healthcare, not just in GI, but across industries. And there are a lot of startups out there. Like, if you go to Hugging Face, like so, which puts is a platform that puts AI models out there. The last I checked, there were some 435,000 AI models. Now that's a lot, and the dust is going to settle, on all this. But and whenever it settles and however all this transforms, what I see happen is they're going to be some platforms, some models that are going to emerge, and the generative AI platforms particularly are learning from a lot of data, that we are feeding it, that's going around. And some of these models are going to even learn. There are, and there will be more computer vision models that will learn from a lot of data that the general public will put out there and from various industries. Now, let's say one of these startups or one of these companies put something out there in gastroenterology, because what when you can detect a face, you can detect a polyp. Like for a computer, it's the same, and you can advance in both sides. Now, for companies like Medtronic and even some of the GI startups out there that have invested a whole lot of money in building the algorithms, building the AI to the point where it's come to, would you be concerned, or are you concerned that it could be disrupted by an incumbent who is coming in because of the use of data which is out there, that is coming in with better technology, or somehow is able to do it but in a much more cost effective manner? Or what if they put something out there that's free? I often think about all this. I'm curious to see how you might respond to something like this.
No, I think you bring up a great point. And first and foremost, I think that the more conversation around AI that's generated, with competitors, which we expect to have, the better. I think that it's what it will take for this to gain more attention within healthcare. But I will also say that, not all AI is created equal. I think that, we have the benefit of some time behind us where we've been able to collect more data and more images to refine our algorithm. And that takes time. And especially in this very heavily regulated environment, having, data agreements and whatnot to help facilitate that, not always easy to come by. And so, we are already on our third, version of GI Genius. You can definitely expect more to come, that's even more fine-tuned. And I think that an algorithm in and of itself isn't necessarily difficult for people to come up with, but to make sure it's done in the correct way, in a way that can actually go through the entire FDA approval process and meet those requirements, have the clinical data to support it, et cetera, is much harder to come by. And so we have, a large number of studies to help support the idea of, how the efficacy behind GI Genius, which, will take time for others to have as well. I think that that's, one aspect of it. I think the other half that people often don't seem to consider, which I've learned, in my role here, is that to then commercialize that is a whole nother challenge. And I think that we have that sort of commercial framework, infrastructure, muscle to be able to help do that quickly, which is what we've been doing for the past, 2 years since the approval of GI Genius. There's been, some growing pains, along the way, but I think we've gotten to a point where we've learned a lot of the lessons, been able to demonstrate kind of the value of it and the clinical benefit of that. And that's again the tip of the iceberg because we've been very much focused on fall protection up until this point.
What kind of announcements or progress can the industry expect in 2024, if you're allowed to say that it's?
And yeah, that's the conundrum. It's like, well, there's not a whole lot that I can say that isn't public already. But just to expect that, we are still very, very much invested in the AI space. That's the way we want to position ourselves, is to be leaders in AI. And, again, being first to market with GI Genius was a big step that I think we're trying to keep the momentum going. and approach it from the various different angles. So yeah, just know that you can definitely expect more in 2024. We're not stopping here.
Awesome. Now, Austin, you have a book coming out in April. Tell us about
Yeah.
it.
Yes. So I'm very excited about this book. So on top of everything else that I've been doing this past year, I wrote a book called Gut, an Owner's Guide. And this is being published by one of our well-known publishers out there, DK, which is one of the Penguin Random House imprints. And it's basically an illustrated guide to all things gastroenterology and gut health, including the procedural aspects and kind of the parts of the patient experience that are not just diet and nutrition, and things that obviously are close to my heart because as an interventionalist, I feel like areas of GI that most people don't even realize are part of gastroenterology, and the fun technology kind of driven aspects of interventional GI, of advanced endoscopy that I'm finally getting a chance to cover through this book. So it's coming out in April of this year of 2024, but it's also already available for pre-order actually at all major retailers. And so a lot to look forward to there. I'm very excited.
Excellent. I'll definitely get my copy, pre-order it. My final question, Austin, is your view on the future of gastroenterology. Where do you see things going 3 years from now, 5 years from now, even 10 years from now?
Ooh, gastroenterology, first and foremost, is such a broad field, right? Like, I know we're very much focused, especially on the medtech side, on devices and technology, but there's also so much happening in pharmaceuticals with all the different conditions. I think there have been hot topics for years now about development in the microbiome space, in obesity. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of progress there. So there's so many fronts that I think we're gonna continue to learn more about over the years. But specifically for medtech in the space that I'm involved in, again, AI, I think we're just seeing the beginning of it. So you can expect much more there, whether it's clinical applications to improve our clinical outcomes, but also our operational improvements, how to improve our efficiency and workflow. I think we're going to definitely see that as well, which I know is much needed, especially in this climate of, a lot of physician burnout. So hopefully that will make a difference in, our lives as health professionals. I think that there's still other improvements that can be made on various fronts in the device space, make our lives easier, more ergonomic. I won't get into too much detail there, but I think that there's still a lot to be done there. And, even in the time since I was in training until now, we've seen a lot of surgical procedures become things that we can handle in gastroenterology. So that shift to less invasive, I think we'll continue to see movement there. And kind of last but not least, I'll say, putting my social media hat on, I think that we'll see a more informed general public. That's at least my goal, especially with the book, with my social media presence, and hopefully with that, we'll also see people getting the appropriate care that they need and better utilizing healthcare resources. And so I hope to not only see progress there, but also to make progress on that front.
Superb. On that note, Austin, what would be your final piece of advice to people listening or watching the Scope Forward show?
I would say always try to consider a different perspective. I think, part of what has led me to where I am today is always trying to think about, not necessarily what I believe in, but why people disagree with me or think in the way that they do, and being open to, unconventional ideas. And, even in my current role in medtech, I have the benefit of seeing not only kind of having clinical practice and seeing how physicians perform their jobs there, but also understanding the different side of what determines how the innovation comes to market and finally ends up in our hands, and all the pain points of the medtech business that ultimately impact how we perform our procedures and impact patients' lives. And so always think about like, okay, why, if things aren't going your way or if things aren't necessarily aligned with what you believe in, question that and try to dig a little deeper. And I think that that's how I try to approach anything.
That piece of advice is golden. So, Austin Chiang, Chief Medical Officer of Medtronic Endoscopy, thank you so much for being on the Scope Forward show. I've thoroughly benefited and enjoyed this conversation. Thanks once again.
Thank you. It's been an honor, Praveen. Thank you so much for having me.